皆さん、こんにちは。日本の不動産の冒険をご覧いただきありがとうございます。Thank you for joining me this week on my adventures in Japanese real estate. And I started it off in Japanese once again because we're talking a little bit about the vocabulary of Japanese houses. And this time I'm going to get into the vocabulary of things that you'll find inside a Japanese house, especially a more traditional Japanese house. So, very excited about that. Hi everybody, I'm Paul Durant, and of course these are my adventures in Japanese real estate. I have been involved in the real estate business, I guess now, reluctantly for the last 4 years or so, and I hope to share some of my experiences, some of my adventures with all of you so that you can be more aware in case you're looking for an Akiya in Japan, or in case it's just simply something that you are interested in. And now I want to talk about the features that you'll find inside a Japanese house, and especially a traditional Japanese house. And let me start off with when you enter the house. The entryway of the house, the interior entryway, is called the Genkan. And the Genkan is sort of thought of halfway between inside and outside. So a lot of times you'll find that it's got maybe stone flooring. In the older houses, even dirt flooring, actual dirt flooring will be there. Cement in modern houses. Maybe some tile, but it's not going to be a nice wood floor or anything like that. And there's going to be a step or two up from the Genkan that you're going to have to step up to get into the house officially. So the Genkan is sort of this area in between the inside of the house and the outside of the house. In the older houses, the Genkans would be very large, and sometimes they would be the area where the family would do business or something like that, especially if they were having a business in their house, or if they were agriculture family, they might store equipment in there, etc. There's Genkan that actually are like garages where people would literally drive their carts and things into the house for whatever purpose. So there's a lot of different types of older Genkans that you might run into. The more modern house is going to be a bit smaller. Some are relatively large, some are quite small. Of course, it depends on the size of the house. And a lot of times if you're looking at a mansion or a condo, Japanese condo, they're going to be really small indeed. But that's the Genkan, and that's a very important area. Of course, that's where you take off your shoes and put on your slippers, or you can just go in stocking feet. Usually people don't care so much about that. But if you are entering a Japanese house, definitely leave your shoes in the Genkan. Don't enter the house with shoes. So after you go into the Genkan, you'll probably be in what's called a Rouka, or hallway. A lot of times Japanese houses will enter into a hallway, and sometimes there'll be a stairway up to the second floor there or something like that. But they enter into a hallway rather than entering into the room. And this gives sort of a privacy of different rooms and different areas. And so the Japanese don't really think about specific rooms for specific purposes. A lot of times they just sort of have living areas. And so the Genkan is not going to open into a living area. It's going to open into a hallway that's going to maybe separate into a couple of living areas. So a lot of times you'll see a Japanese house listed as LDK, or maybe just DK. These are specifications that stand for kind of obvious things: living, dining, and kitchen. So L, living, D, dining, K, kitchen, LDK. And sometimes there'll be SLDK, so there'll be some kind of specialty room, or sometimes just DK, so there's no living area per se. So a lot of times the Japanese will sort of mix the dining area and the living area and the kitchen into sort of one sort of standardized central area. And a lot of times there won't be really very Japanese features there, except you may have some old sinks or some old cooking or something like that. But basically, you're not going to see much of that stuff. That room is probably going to be modern. Oftentimes it's an add-on to an older house as well. So that is the LDK portion of a typical Japanese house. So in addition, you'll see a number before that, like 2 LDK, 4 LDK, 6 LDK, etc. And that just refers to the number of extra rooms. And you can call them bedrooms. A lot of times they're not. A lot of times they are other types of living rooms. There's no specific concept of a bedroom per se, although in modern Japanese houses, that's less true. So certainly modern Japanese houses kind of have specific bedroom areas. You're not going to find like a master bedroom suite or a bedroom with a separate bath, etc. Those types of things you're really not going to find very often in a Japanese house. But it is true that modern houses have more of a concept of this is an actual bedroom, this is a kid's room, this is the parents' room, etc. So that does exist. But the older Japanese houses really are just mostly tatami rooms with the tatami mats, and they're just used for various aspects of life at various given times. So that is the 2, 4, 6, etc. of the LDK. A lot of the older houses are like 8, 10 LDK because 2 or 3 families would live under the same roof in the old days. And so these old houses are really giant with lots and lots of different spaces for different types of living and different experiences. There is the Washitsu. I mentioned that in the last episode. The Washitsu is a Japanese style room, and that room's going to have tatamis and things like that. And there's a Youshitsu, and the Youshitsu is a Western style room. A lot of times it'll have like a wood floor or some type of other flooring, maybe even a carpet in some of the older houses. And that's going to have like Western furniture, maybe a couch and a TV, chairs, etc. So that's the difference between a Washitsu and a Youshitsu. So a lot of times the houses will have both. Oftentimes the older houses they were Washitsus and then they transferred them into Youshitsu. It just really basically means they changed the floor is really all that happened there. But inside mostly the Washitsu is a place called a Tokonoma. Tokonoma is kind of an alcove inside of the wall, which is intended to be the place where you display art. Generally seasonal art, so you might change it out every season or even change it out a couple of times in a season, but you kind of display some special art associated with the house or associated with the family, etc. In that Tokonoma. And it's kind of when you have guests, the guests will sit looking at the Tokonoma. So that's kind of the special place in the room. Modern people might use the Tokonoma to put a TV set or something like that, unfortunately. But the fact is, they really are beautiful places intended for Japanese art, intended for Japanese scrolls, pottery, etc. So that is the Tokonoma. And a lot of times you'll see those in tea houses as well. So in addition, maybe next to the Tokonoma is where you'll find a Butsudan. A Butsudan is basically like a Buddhist altar. And a lot of the Akiyas will probably have their Butsudan, the actual altar, removed. And there'll only be the space there for the altar. But some of them will still have an altar. And that altar is associated with the family who owned the house at one point. So the ancestors are believed to be associated with that Butsudan. So a lot of times Japanese are very uncomfortable with seeing a Butsudan from another family. Of course, if they go to visit, they don't mind. But if they're living in the house, they're not going to want a Butsudan of another family. And certainly the other family wants to take their Butsudan with them, wherever they're going, because kind of their ancestors are going with them. So that's the Butsudan. If you find a Butsudan in a house, that probably means maybe that house, the generations have gone, or maybe they're no longer practicing or concerning themselves with the Buddhism, etc. But the Butsudan is probably something that, while they can be sometimes very beautiful, if you are expecting a lot of Japanese guests, or if you're opening an Airbnb or something like that, you may not want to keep that Butsudan in there just because it'll kind of potentially upset certain Japanese guests, etc. So generally speaking, a Butsudan is not ideal to have, and it's best if you can get the owner to remove it if you can. But anyway, the Butsudan space is next to the Tokonoma. There is an area of the house called a Engawa. So the Engawa is sort of the porch area that often goes around the Japanese rooms. And a lot of times it'll be covered on the inside with paper shoji doors, which of course you can open and close. And on the outside, maybe glass doors. Sometimes the outside has nothing. It depends on the house. But generally speaking, of course, in modern houses, they don't do it much in modern houses, but in later houses, they're going to have the glass doors there. But those are Those are basically like covered porches or sun porches that are intended to sort of be a connection of the inside and the outside. And a lot of times they open up into a Japanese garden, so they can be really, really beautiful places just to sit and relax, maybe open the doors. But even if the doors close, you know, the view is wonderful. And the shoji screens that will close off the room in front will open up so that you can see the beautiful garden, etc. So that's a really, really cool element of a Japanese house is the Engawa. And Engawas have something called an Amado. So an Amado is basically like a storm door that can close up over the glass doors or close over that Engawa so that you can protect from whatever elements, etc. So that's Amado. And sometimes the whole area, the whole Engawa area with a separate roof and that sort of thing that goes around the house is also called an Amado. So there's a little bit of a double meaning there. Connected to that is the roof itself. So a roof area of a house is the roof of the house is called a Kawara, and the Kawara is really not the roof. The Kawara is the roof tiles that you put on a traditional Japanese house. So a lot of the modern houses, they don't have that. They just have a standard roof. But the Kawara is those very, very heavy, very Japanese pottery tiles that you'll see on the roof. A lot of the older houses have them beautiful. They can be sometimes brown. They're very often blue or green. Sometimes gray as well. And you'll see them also on Japanese castles, sometimes on Buddhist temples, etc. On the older houses, you might find the Gassho roof. The Gassho roof is the very, very steep roof that has actually got grass or straw or whatever on the roof. A lot of times those are covered with a metal casing these days. And basically, if you do have one that's actually grass, it might be very difficult to find somebody who can work on it or work with it because they don't do it very often. Of course, there are people out there. They can be very difficult to deal with. So be aware of that if you're looking at a minka with a Gassho style roof that has maybe a grass roof underneath a metal roof. There could be some additional problems that you're going to have to deal with related to that. And one of the problems could be mildew and mold that's going to grow in those grass roofs as well. So that is the possibilities for roofing for an older house. Modern houses are roofed in more modern style. There'll be metal roofs a lot of times, or sometimes shingled roof, etc., that you might expect to see in other places as well. But the traditional style Kawara is very common for most of the houses built in probably any time in the 20th century. So a couple of more rooms to talk about is the Ofuro. So Japanese style houses, generally speaking, unlike American at least houses, we'll put the water items in the same room. So the toilet, the bath, the shower, the kitchen sink or the bathroom sink, etc., all going to be in that room. Sometimes even the washing machine is going to be in that room. So that's common in a Western style, but in the Japanese room, they're going to separate all of those elements. So the toilet's going to have its own room usually. And maybe, you know, if there's two toilets, there'll be two separate rooms in various places in the house, but they'll be only for the toilet. There'll be another room separated that's going to be for the bathroom sink, maybe the washing machine. It also features sort of a changing area and a work area a lot of times. That's called the Senmenjou area. And the actual sink itself is called the Senmenjou. And then there's the Ofuro. And the Ofuro is the actual bath itself, the room in which the bath is. Now, it's more than just a bathtub. There's also a shower area. It's going to be like a full-size room that's going to have, depending on the house, a very small or very large bath and that relatively large shower area. So that's the Ofuro. So you're going to see those rooms separated out, and sometimes in different areas. So there'll be a toilet on one side of the house, and the Ofuro is going to be on the other, and the Senmenjou is going to be in the other. So they're not even necessarily going to be close, but they usually are because it's easiest to build water areas close to each other. So that's the situation for the Japanese style water rooms. So be aware that you'll see a lot of that, especially in the older houses. It's very rare, even in a modern Japanese house, that you would find the toilet in the same room as the others. You'll find it in business hotels and places like that. They'll have like the unit bath is what they call it, which is the toilet and the bathtub and the sink and everything in kind of one capsule. But that's really the only place you'll see it. You will rarely see it in a modern Japanese house either. They're always going to separate those rooms out. Those rooms are thought of as being separate. So that's a few things about what you might expect to see inside of a Japanese house. There's a million more things to talk about. If you have any questions or comments about any of these things, please do leave it in the comments, and I will be more than happy to answer whatever I can answer, and I'll look up what I need to look up. But thank you very much for watching this week. And next week, I think I'll talk a little bit about some of the areas of Japan that you might be interested in looking into for buying a house. So I know some people have asked about that, and I'll get very general at first, and then we'll try to get a little bit more specific as we go. I also want to talk about some of the other challenges that you might see when you buy any house in Japan, not necessarily an Akiya, but just sort of general words of the wise for any kind of real estate transaction. So we'll get to those things as well. Thank you very much for joining me this week. Arigatou gozaimashita. Mata 来週ね。